So hello everyone, welcome. My name is Paula McMahon. I am the chair of Engineering Together, and welcome to this joint webinar with After the Pandemic, thinking about how cities can be more inclusive to communities. If I can ask that everybody other than the panelists have the speakers on mute and they switch themselves off in terms of the video, that will just help with the experience. We are recording this for it to be on the After the Pandemic YouTube, so it can be watched again and the messages can be spread more widely even. We're going to get a wide range of opinions from our young people from the Tees Valley and Glasgow. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Denise McGuckin of Hartlepool Borough Council. She's the Managing Director and she's going to introduce herself and she's going to chair our panel discussion.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today. I started in local government 25 years ago as a recycling officer, so I'm really passionate about what it is we're trying to do today and start looking at sustainability and climate change and decarbonisation. And it's really sad that 25 years that I've been in this field, we're still having the same conversations, which made me actually join local government to make a difference. So my challenge to you is, please don't be in the same position I am in 25 years. Please make sure that we are starting to reimagine, redesign and rethink about what our cities and our communities are going to look like in terms of the future. So really excited to be here. It's really important that we look, I'm sure, about educating our communities. You know, we don't have the pleasure of living in SimCity, in that computer world where you can build the city as you go. We've got to retrofit and redesign everything, and that's the really hard part of what we're doing today. So I will now hand over to Ruby, who's also on our panel today, and she'll sort of tell you a bit about herself and what she hopes to get from today's meeting.
Hi, I'm Ruby. I'm a final year A-level student studying further maths, physics and design. And I wanted to join the panel because I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to talk to people who aren't my peers about issues with the environment and hear different ideas and different viewpoints.
Okay, thanks. That's wonderful. I think we'll now go to Brandon, who's actually in Glasgow, where the COP event is coming to be. So over to you, Brandon.
Yeah, hi, I'm Brandon. I'm a third-year electrical mechanical engineering student at Strathclyde University. I'm also president of Engineers, co-president of Engineers about Borough, Strathclyde this year. Yeah, I thought it was a great event to get involved with. It was passed along to me through EWB, and talking about inclusive city design and things like that, especially in run up to COP26. It's a great opportunity to talk to people from loads of different backgrounds, loads of different levels about their perspective, and that idea of inclusivity in design and sustainable design is a really important thing, I think, and we have to start thinking about all these problems as a whole system. So every hole that's there, that's sort of leaking out all these problems of sustainability and all those sorts of things, they're not separate, and so issues of that are economic and societal tie into those technical issues about sustainability as well, and cities are sort of the building blocks and the testing ground for all of that, and so it's a very important thing to be talking about, and making sure that as we progress, we make sure that everyone is there able to progress and access as well. Ideas about mass transit that's accessible, and sustainable urbanisation being in harmony with nature and everyone that's in it, and just making sure access is key. So being able to discuss those things today should be enjoyable, but also something to learn from as well. I'm hoping to get quite a bit out of this. So.
Thanks, Brandon. That's wonderful. Vince, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vince. I'm a final year student at Pursglove 2. I was introduced to this by my geography teacher, and I thought it's going to be a good opportunity to get myself out there and get myself out of my comfort zone while also speaking about issues that are quite important to me as a geography student and someone who will witness the effects of the climate crisis in the future too.
Thanks, Vince. Bijoy, Jose, I know you were trying to join us on the panel and had some technical difficulties. I can see you there. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. Let me start by wishing everyone good day. My team is spreading everything everywhere. As a result, man-made and induced climate input can be controlled everywhere on Earth. And there are two types of disaster on our planet: natural disaster and human-made disaster. We can start from here by fighting in a way that does not affect both to humans, animals, and nature. That's my thought. Thank you everyone for listening my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. I struggle to hear you, I have to admit. So what I'm going to ask people to do is, by all means, put your mitts up and hands, whatever it is we need to do to talk. But if we can encourage people to use the chat as well, I'll make sure that we record everything. And if there are any answers or questions, sorry, and we can't sort of get to the bottom of those today, which I'm sure we're not going to solve the world, otherwise we'd all be sitting in Westminster now, wouldn't we, and having the answers to Rishi Sunak's budget announcement, but never mind. We'll be doing that. So, but today's about a good debate, but we can do that in the chat. Just to remind everyone as well, this is recorded and we will be putting it on YouTube, as Paula said. So I think from that, we'll now hand over and start asking each other some questions to the panel. So I don't know if anybody wants to, who's going to be brave enough to go first and ask a question or sort of pose a problem for us all to start debating.
I'll go first if you don't mind, Denise. So, yeah, what do people think that an inclusive community looks like for a sustainable future?
Thanks, Paula. Is there any member of the panel that wants to go first before any of the audience members want to come in as well?
Yeah, I can jump in there. Inclusive communities is, well, it's quite multifaceted, but from an engineer perspective, which is probably the best perspective I can get, I was just the other day doing a climate fresh workshop where we were sort of connecting the cause and effect from the very get-go of why climate change was happening. And at the very bottom line, so it all started with us, creating emissions and things like that, but at the very bottom line of it were a bunch of human effects, poverty and poor access to food and all these sorts of things. So at the get-go of it, it's realizing, I think, that all of the issues which affect those least fortunate in society are caused at the top end by a lack of perspective from our consumption at the top of society. So first of all, when we're talking about what we want inclusive communities to look like, I think my key thing is reduced consumption, fair consumption. In that, the ability for everyone to be equipped to follow through on that, because that's an easy thing to say for people that are in a fortunate position to have enough options to take the more sustainable options. But if we take transport, for example, I live in Scotland, which is a massive rural community. Dependence on internal combustion engines is going to last quite a while here unless we can look at a way of providing opportunities for people to embrace electrification or whatever other means you may see without having to uproot and deconstruct their life. It has to be very staged and staggered, and so it's all about upskilling and providing the knowledge and capacity to actually do the right thing. It's very easy to ask people to do the right thing. It's a lot harder to do it if your options are restricted. So again, it's about that access and understanding that the people that spend a lot of the time thinking about the ways we're going to solve solutions are probably the ones which had a hand to play in the problems which led to them in the first place. And thinking about that full system from start to finish, like I mentioned before, all these systems, every hole, every issue in that dam is connected. and they'll have fault lines which match along to each other, and you have to treat it as a whole system and view it that way. And so if you're looking to have inclusive systems, you need to actually provide people with the capacity to enable themselves rather than just ask it of them.
Thank you, Brandon. Ruby, I don't know if you want to say what you think inclusive communities means to you.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, you know, like everybody having access, like Brandon said, to things, and, you know, having community spaces, you know, like green spaces and stuff where people can gather. Because I know that in cities there's like a lot of concrete and stuff, and like green spaces are like linked with improving mental health and stuff in general. So that kind of like feeds back into another issue that we're tackling.
I think that they're both really good points, aren't they? I mean, I'll bring Vince in, but I think as we move towards changing our energy sources of cars and public transport and moving away from fossil fuels to electricity and hydrogen, so how do we build it? What's the design for the infrastructure to support those communities to actually make that change? And also, we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months the importance of parks and green space, haven't we? As we've all been encouraged to go out and walk and use our parks. So I think that's more and more actually provides us with the evidence to support the need for both of those things. Vince, I don't know if you want to add to anything on the inclusive communities and what it means to you.
Well, to me, inclusion means to give everyone an equal opportunity and equal participation in communities. And I think partially this also has to do with accessible architecture, like ramps for disabled people with wheelchairs and more signs with braille for blind people. But there's other ways to include people in the community, but that's what I just had in mind right now. But it's good to make sure everyone in the community has these opportunities to participate and enter buildings and read and that, yeah.
I think those three answers, and I'm sure there's lots more, actually demonstrate how inclusive community means so much to different people, and actually there's no definition of what it means. You know, it has so many different layers, and that's what your point, Brendan, about the whole systems approach. I think, you know, how we have to look at that. I've seen Julie's put something in the chat. Julie, do you want to ask the question that you've written in the chat for me, please? Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's lovely. Welcome.
Yeah. So I go into schools, and one of the tasks I ask students to do is, this is after talking about hydrogen, by the way. So I say to them that in the future, because of our new technologies, we're going to need our towns are going to look different. So I get them to think about what their towns are going to look like. So I just wanted to ask the panel, what do you think? How are we going to cut more green space? What's that going to look like in the future? What do you think?
Thanks, Julie. I'll go to Ruby first, because she mentioned green spaces as well. So how do you think the green space will look like in the future, Ruby?
Well, you see these buildings, you know, which have grass on the roof and stuff. So you could do things like that. And also there's that building, I think it's called the Vertical Forest in Milan, which has got like trees growing all the way up. So I think that's quite like an interesting way, because obviously we're just like in cities, you're just building up. So like having the green spaces like on the actual buildings as they grow is like, it makes sense, because then you don't have to, because like flat area in cities will be quite expensive to buy for parks and stuff. So having it on the buildings makes a lot more sense.
That's lovely, Ruby. Vince, have you got any ideas of what green space will look like in the future?
Well, I learned about brownfield sites in cities where deindustrialization has led to empty spaces in especially northern cities. And I feel like this empty space could be changed into actual green space, so it can be used for the community rather than just laying there barren. But the decontamination element of that would probably bring some difficulty into that, as well as the undisturbance of the areas leading to high amounts of biodiversity in the area. I don't know how councils will feel about interrupting that biodiversity, But I feel like those would be a good option to rejuvenate, to turn into green areas for the community.
I think it's a really important point. Brandon, have you got anything you want to contribute towards?
Yeah, so both those points sort of taking the things I think about in the built environment, those sort of vertical forests and incorporating green space into architecture is a really big thing, and that has sort of dual utility too, because it helps cool down cities, which is really useful, especially when you're seeing heat waves and things like that. And it's also appealing, and then it also helps with air quality as well. And so harmony with nature in your buildings is really useful. But then I think as well, it's also important to actually consider where people can get their feet on the ground and stand around and look and take a breath. I know when I was in lockdown in Glasgow last year, when I went home and was able to go to the beach or for a walk with the dog, it was so very different to standing and seeing rows of trees along a pavement or something like that to actually be in it. And those brown spaces that brown fields that Vince was talking about there are useful. And some ideas, I mean, biodiversity gets mentioned there. I think at all these cases you can kill a lot of birds with one stone. That you can incorporate further ranges of biodiversity. Some of the stuff I look at is microbiology with bacterial resistance, and you can sort of repurpose a lot of that soil by incorporating different types of bacteria, and then you can encourage different animals and things to develop in that space and sort of have a very natural green space within that area, which I think is it's sort of different to what we've done with green spaces in cities for a long time, but sort of the way the trajectory is going, and in a lot of ways quite useful, because you're again making it far more close to the actual effects of what a non-urban green space does for people.
No, it's really interesting. You see in a lot of new buildings now not only have those green roofs, but also have walls, don't they, that they plant into. So I don't know what the actual that planting type wall. And I think as we move more and more to sort of working from home and hybrid working, I'm working from home today, whereas before the lockdown I'd been in 9 to 7 o'clock or whatever, 5 o'clock, 5 days a week. We won't need the buildings and the offices that we have in those cities, and and the retail sector's changing so much, isn't it? And it's out actually, are the leaders of these cities brave enough to actually say we'll demolish them and look at public realm and have green spaces so people have got that dwell time, because it also helps with your mental health, which is another layer of inclusive communities as well, isn't it? So I think that's one of the things that I take from the conversation we're having, as well as a leader of a local authority area. Am I brave enough to get my politicians to try and support that? And I definitely am. Whether they support me is another matter. But so we've got some more questions. Are there beehives? Oh, there are beehives and roofs in Newcastle. That's really interesting. Are they sort of managed by local communities, Julie, or local residents, or?
Yeah, there's a specialist. I forgot her name. That's terrible, isn't it? I was at a meeting with her on Friday. She's a bee expert, and she's working on this project on various in Leeds and I think in Newcastle. And they're putting them on the roofs now. But what they're saying is these green roofs initiatives will help the bees. And it's simple things like just allowing, for a council perspective, actually, allowing hedgerows and dandelions to thrive, less cutting, so it saves us money in the long run. Yeah. So you're not constantly having to cut the verges and things like that. Because in spring, when the bees come out, I didn't know this, they're really tired, because they've been hibernating and they're low on food, and they come out and the first thing they usually see is a dandelion. And it's such a simple thing. But our cities obviously get very big and concretey, as you all just mentioned. And there's this big gap of where insects and wildlife can go, isn't there? Because there's just nothing for them. So we need to start incorporating our concrete jungle into a more greeny, natural place.
No, that's really, I quite like that idea. I know we do wildflowers rather, you know, than trying to reduce the grass around, cutting the grass in places. But so that sounds really exciting. And just again, encouraging everyone to use the chat, or if you want to contribute to the debate, and just please shout out. I'm sure the panel won't mind, because I think it really adds to the debate that we're having. I suppose there's another question in the chat about one thing you would wish to be different and new in your town or city. What one thing would it be if you had that you know, magic wand that you could do and change your city that you currently live in? So Vince, would you like to go first?
Well, off the top of my head, I'm thinking about pedestrianising more areas near the town centre, because the traffic paired with the busy sidewalks isn't really safe or nice environment to be around, especially Liverpool Road. If you've driven down there, you can really see how busy it can get and how much of a nightmare it is to cross the road or like drive down it. And I feel like if we pedestrianize that, that would help the businesses in the area to attract more pedestrians walking through it. But I know a lot of buses go through that area, so I think it'll be quite difficult to reroute all of the bus routes. But I feel like there's enough options going around these avenues leading to the town centre that we can use the buses for.
That's really good. Brandon?
Yeah, it's actually quite tricky, especially if I'm thinking about Glasgow. It's or any well, I'm talking from respect to large cities, but in any environment really, I'm trying to veer away from the technical considerations, but more just a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in is outreach and STEM education. And in a lot of those cases, the buck sort of stops when it's finished. You'll do a workshop and then that's it, and then you'll do another workshop and that's it. And I think, as we were talking about with inclusivity, making a community which is committed to a community is probably one of the biggest things. And so having all, like COP's a great example, making sure that if an event like that happens, the entire city is involved and that the entire city is invested, and that all of the things that you aim for in sustainability involve everyone at every stage. And so having a group of people in an organization in any local environment which is very committed and has a good community around it to actually improving the area and has everyone from every sort of stage and background in that environment involved in that. So that if, you know, a university or a school wanted to do an outreach project where they wanted to test a new thing for disability access in shopping centres, for example, the time it takes to get that happening is as quick as possible. And then that's where your momentum builds up, and everyone that's got all these other ideas and events is able to do it as easily as possible, and you're sort of maximising human potential and human ingenuity for solving these problems and doing it together, and doing it without the sort of bureaucratic and massive economic hurdles which sort of sit and face us at the moment.
It's an interesting view. Ruby?
Yeah, if there was something that I would change about my town, I live somewhere quite rural, so like the bus service and like the public transport is like terrible. You can't, there's no buses run on Sunday, so like if you don't drive, you can't get out. So I think, like Brandon was saying earlier, that like it's not really inclusive because there's a lot of older people where I live as well, so if they can't drive, they can't go anywhere on the weekend.
Yeah. It's very much that one of those that are driven by the economy, isn't it? Public transport rather than sustainability, I think. And if it's not used, then the bus companies pull the service because it's about money, and we need to try and change that view and make sure that the environment is as important in their eyes as the economy, I think. Bijoy, do you want to answer and join the chat? Jose, Mr. Jose? No, okay. So another question that's in the chat then is, do you think change is happening quick enough, and what ideas do you have to accelerate change? Is there anyone who wants to go first, or should I just continue to roll my dice as I am? So I'll go to you, Brandon.
Well, depends on the problem, I suppose. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about how fast change is happening, and it happens in a lot of different avenues. But like I said, it's all connected. Change, I don't think is happening quick enough. At least the actual hard change that needs to occur. And I think that the main thing behind that is making sure that as many people as possible are on the same page, and having everyone be invested in that common goal. And so I think a lot of that just comes from talking about these sorts of things, which again sort of links into my previous bit. If you've got town or city, it's about making it a community and having people interacting and knowing each other. And in the same way that in the environment, you see, well, we talk about houses a lot and housing, but it's about a home. And in healthcare, we talk about health and statistics and data and the science of it, but the other half of that word is care, and it's a human process. And so this as well is the main the stopping block in all of it is communication. And so making sure that you can educate people about problems of sustainability, problems about inclusivity, is probably the biggest thing, and giving people the time, the space and the environment to take that moment to get the perspective and view all of it. And everyone's got big problems, and understanding that everyone else also has big problems is probably the best way to facilitate that. And then you can actually start discussing, right, we've all got these problems, how are we going to solve them? And then you have this investment and this manpower behind it, which allows the change to happen. There's obviously a lot of technical and scientific and issues behind that as well, which need to be solved. But those systems and processes are already there for that. It's about now getting the energy behind it.
It's really, I think people think, don't they, about change, and it's not just about physical change, is it? You know, it is about society and how society changes. I know if you go to places like Copenhagen, they don't rely on government to do that no, they don't think they're entitled to things. They support each other as a community, as your point earlier, which I thought was a really strong line about community, committed to be a community and fully investing in what that means for the long term, not just for the shrub bed at the end of your street, you know what I mean, and maintaining that, but actually looking at what it means to support each other. Ruby, what do you, is change happening quickly?
I mean, it's hard to tell, isn't it? Because it's like, you don't really know until it's happened. But I think for accelerating change and stuff, I think definitely like we don't really learn a lot about sustainability and that kind of things in school or college. I've never really heard about it. So I think just like having that discussion with like your peers at college, I think would really like put it into perspective for some people.
Yeah. I think, like I said, you know, I've been in this world for 25 years, and whilst I started as a recycling officer, still having the same conversations with our communities about trying to get them to recycle. So I don't know. So I think from that perspective, change is definitely not happening quick enough, you know. And but then when you look at the pandemic, how quickly we could invest as a government and to make change happen. So it's about recognising that, prioritise, and all respecting and understanding that the environment, if we don't do it now, at the end of this century, well, I definitely won't be here, but you guys will, and I'm hoping you won't have that, be having that same conversation with your head in your hands, asking your children and grandchildren to sort of pick up the pieces and put it right. So Vince, what do you think? Is change happening quick enough? Do you have any ideas that we can do to accelerate change?
I feel like people in general don't really like change because that's just what they're used to, and I feel like that's not really going to change in terms of like human nature, but I feel like sometimes we just need to push ourselves and we need to get out there and get over that, because, well, the earth isn't really going to wait for us, isn't it?
It's a good point. It is. And I think, yeah, the pressure is on you young people, isn't there, really, to make change. And I'm hoping, Brandon, when you're in Glasgow, in the COP26 conference and everything, and Paula, over the next 2 weeks, that your voices are heard really strongly. Julie's put in about people being addicted to cars and how we can encourage them to use public transport more. Any ideas on how we do that? I know I would be interested in that as a leader of a local council. Do you want to go first, Brandon?
First of all, the term public transport could be argued about, because obviously it gets chopped up and divvied about, which can make it quite complicated. But that's probably a separate discussion. But the biggest thing, like I said, in the UK, the jump between rural, suburban and urban is kind of all over the place, which makes things quite tricky. And so you want sort of larger scale infrastructure to be there for that. And I think affordable mass transit is probably one of the biggest things that's going to reduce the need for that. Then it needs to be effective. People aren't going to use it if the only thing motivating them is brownie points environmentally. And you need to actually make sure that the system is sustainable, and look at the long term of what that looks like. Discouraging the use of cars is kind of hard, because it's private, it's completely theirs, which has utility beyond public transport that public transport will never be able to achieve, unless you look at, which a lot of places are going to, which is leasing for a very short period of time a vehicle, which is a lot more easy to do with EVs, electrical vehicles, and due to charging points and things like that, it's probably also easier for electric vehicles. So a lot of systems discuss sort of having an app on your phone, and okay, there's taxi services for it, but also you'd just be able to drive it, the car come along, and obviously self-driving cars get solicited down the line quite a bit. It could help with that. But you essentially borrow it for a period of time in a similar way to a lot of bikes get used. So it's publicly private transport, which is sort of a nice transitionary thing. But I think the biggest thing just is that it needs to become more affordable, more accessible, more efficient public transport. And to do that, it can't be worked on bit by bit as much as it is just now. It needs to be viewed at the large scale, like we do with a lot of our other infrastructure systems. But when it comes to transport, because it's so complicated in terms of who runs it, who owns it, and who uses it, we tend not to have the systems view of it, and tend not to look at it from such a large perspective. So it involves people, again, talking to each other, and the onus being on the people that currently operate that public transport, going, right, okay, let's sit down and talk about how we can best optimize this, which will actually lead to a higher use of public transport and will be better for everyone in the long run anyway, including the people that want people to use it more financially.
Thanks, Brandon. I went on mute then because I was getting a bit of echo. Got a few questions here. I mean, we operate a car loan scheme run by a voluntary sector community, and that they are electric cars, and you can hire them by the hour. Do you know what I mean? But I have to say, you know, it's a start. You know, it's 2 cars. You know, it's nothing great, but it is a start of a process. I'll move on about Ruby. You mentioned about young people when you were at school and college, and about how you weren't really informed about sustainability. And I suppose, do you think that we need to address the education, the curriculum, to make sure that young people are aware of sustainability sooner than they are?
Yeah, I think so. I think because we have form time a couple of times a week, and I think that like in that time for sure we could do some like even just PowerPoints and stuff about sustainability, because we tend to do like a lot of them, and I always felt like they weren't very useful. But I think doing something on sustainability and like even what you can do just around college and things would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the businesses have a role to play in sort of supporting the colleges and doing that, don't they? You know, sort of giving them a problem to solve. And I think I think businesses are often quite scared, if I'm honest, of students, you know, and go in and talk to them. And I think so. Whereas you can be worried about you're going in for your first interview. I think sometimes employees are a bit like that with students as well. But I do agree with you. We need to sort of look at how we do that. The Chancellor this afternoon has announced that flights between Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland will have a reduced tax on them. And he believed, and the answer was it'll save, I think it was £9 billion or something. How do you think that's going to be received at the COP26? So it's going to encourage more people to fly, isn't it? So I don't know, rather than use the trains. So what are your views, Vince? What do you think about that? I think you're on mute, Paula.
Sorry.
I personally don't support it because I think air travel is more effective if it's with longer distances, like overseas, like over continents. So I think there'd be better options like trains or buses throughout the country. But I think internationally, that's where we should be concentrating our flights rather than internally, because flights do have really high carbon emissions, and I think it'll be more worth it if we just focus on international flights rather than internal flights, since there's so many other options inside the country.
Yeah. I agree. I must admit, when I was listening to the budget before I came on, there was a few things I was thinking, you do realise COP's in 4 days' time, and some of the things you're announcing just don't seem to be integrated in their policy decisions. But I'm not a politician, so it's dead easy for me to say that, I suppose. I think so. Paul, a question to all three of the panel, and I suppose to everyone else who's listening in, is what do you think is going to be more effective in changing people's behaviour? Is it by their hearts or their heads? And how do you think we should go about that? So, Brandon, I'll come to you first.
That's the easiest answer probably given today, and I think wholeheartedly it's hearts. Not the idea that you need to be specialised to have, you know, this technical understanding of any of these issues in order to play a part in them is not useful, really. But making people committed is the biggest thing. And when it comes to sustainability, even, you know, talking about, you know, like urban planning and infrastructure in cities, people will go, well, that's not connected to me at all. But then you need to let them see, oh, well, okay, so what's really annoying you right now? What's bothering you? And, you know, they could say, well, the streets are piling with rubbish at the moment because there's infrastructure issues there, or you know, there's smog, or there's emissions and all these such things that are they're very like simple examples to give. But when you attach those to the whole perspective, that's what you do it. And it also, and we don't listen to heads, and we don't listen to our own heads, we listen to hearts. And when it comes to issues on sustainability, we are far more likely to listen to a friend or a family member and talk with them and think about it with them than we are to a specialist on the television, which shows that it is all about making people connected and solving the problem. And so change will come much more when people realise how the change will affect them and affect those that they care about. Denise, you're muted there.
Denise, you're on mute.
So thinking of recycling as an easy subject, because everyone should recycle. To me, it's like brushing your teeth, you know, but I still go into the recycling boxes in our house and move them around and swap them over and feel like I'm in a geography lesson teaching my husband, but never mind. And Paula knows my husband, so she knows how frustrating that can be for me. But anyway, how do you think we make it easy for people? Why don't they want to recycle? Why is it really difficult to put a can or a plastic bottle in a box or a bag or a different recycling bin to your normal rubbish? What is it that makes people just not connect with that simple behaviour? Ruby, I'd be interested to hear from you.
I think it's just carelessness and like not really realizing the impact of like what you're doing. Like it really annoys me when I watch people put glass bottles in the bin and like not in the recycling. But like I know at the end of the day, they're not really thinking about how, oh, that's going to go to landfill and it's going to be there for ages. When really like they should have put it in the other one and it will be recycled.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really difficult because it's like, how do you get people to like understand that it is like really, that does matter. It's not just like another flippant thing, because if loads of people do that, then that builds up.
Yeah. Vince, do you agree?
Well, I just think it's really easy not to recycle, and I think if people are lazy, then yeah, they just won't recycle because they won't think critically about where their waste is going. But I think we should make it more clear that where the waste goes, where and how long this waste like will last in the landfills too. And I think maybe that will get people to be less lazy about it. But again, it is just so easy to just throw your plastic bottles in the normal bin, really.
Yeah. Brandon?
What Vince was saying there, know where it goes. Like, we don't know where anything we buy comes from, and we don't know where any of it goes once we put it in the bin, which is a big issue. And like recycling used to, well, throwing waste away used to be very disconnected to us because we chuck it at other countries to deal with. And so when we talk about city design for tomorrow, we shouldn't just be talking about our cities, there's other people's cities, you know, and they are dealing with the problems of our waste management, which is very problematic. But now we're even seeing those issues, rare earth metals, which are super crucial to all the things we love the most, all of our tech and all those sorts of things, becoming even rarer. They're harder to source, and we probably throw away in general waste quite a lot of reusable materials that we now need. And so we're seeing the effects of that on the other end of our supply chains when we want to buy stuff. And so connecting the dots for people and having better transparency of where our goods come from and where they go when we put them away would help that a lot. As well as that, there's probably a lot of onus on the people that actually sell the stuff to us as well to manage where that waste is going. Obviously, for standard recycling, that's something that we need to be a bit more conscious of and with that. But when you're trying to put your appliances in the bin and recycle those and things like that, a lot of that should go back in a circular economy, go back to the companies that built it, and then they should be repurposing it as well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. But I don't know if people saw, I think it was a panorama on BBC One earlier this week, and it was about Coca-Cola bottles, and about 2/3 of Coca-Cola bottles in the sea are actually, 2/3 of plastic bottles in the sea were actually Coca-Cola. You know, so, but it wasn't just, you know, it's Fanta, water, they're all owned by the same company. And it was really tragic to watch, you know, everything we've seen it on David Attenborough's programs and everything else. But I think for me, we need to get, it's different. Every town you live in is different. How you recycle, isn't it? People have boxes or bags. You can recycle cardboard, egg boxes, and some you can, some you can't. You can do plastic. And I think if we had this national approach, so it was easy for everyone, and we all knew, you know, I think that would, and I think government should enforce that on local government, give them the funding to do it, but say this is the national programme and this is the way, and then we can educate the public. But there comes a point where you have to enforce, because, you know, if you're not going to change, we're going to have to make you change, unfortunately. But that's a personal view.
Well, in some countries they have that thing, don't they, where you pay a deposit when you buy a bottle, and then when you bring it back you get your money back and stuff. So I don't really understand why they haven't tried to do that.
Yeah, but when I was a little girl, Ruby, you used to buy your bottles of pop from a van that came around the street, and you used to take it back and you would get a shilling, and you could go and buy some sweets with it or something while your mum was buying the pop. So that was a way of recycling, and it was really simple. But the issue was the cost of the vehicle and the labour and everything else, and plastic came along and it was a cheaper product. But now they've thought, again, making decisions, not thinking about that full whole systems approach, which Brendan referred to right at the beginning. You know, decades later, we're dealing with the problem. So yeah, I think there's a lot there. I'm conscious. Some of our colleagues, I think Mr. Karen and I haven't had chance to ask any questions. Is there anything you want to raise or ask anything, or have you? Is everything okay? No comments. Okay, so I'm taking that as we're doing a good job, guys. So so question there, which one city in the world do you think is a good example of inclusion and sustainability? And I think this might be our last question for today. So I think that's a difficult one, but Vince, do you know of a city that you think is a shining example and best practice, something that we should be looking to strive to be?
I mentioned earlier about pedestrianising the roads leading to the town centre in my city, my town of Middlesbrough. And with that in mind, I was thinking about Amsterdam and how since the 70s they've pedestrianised the entire city centre and made bikes the normal mode of transport with people in Amsterdam. And I think that's a really good example we should take for the rest of the world, but it was quite a slow process, I think. But yeah, that was just off the top of my head. I think that's about it I can think about right now.
No, that's good, because again, we talked about the different layers, didn't we, of what this means. So Ruby, but where's there a city of good example?
I'm not actually sure. My geography is pretty terrible.
Did you not mention, was it Milan earlier about
oh yeah, that's just a singular building though in Milan with the trees and stuff. It's not like an area or anything, I don't think. And then I think the architect's doing some work in some other different cities as well and things. So
okay. Brandon, are you aware of any cities we should strive to look at or best practice?
Sustainability a lot of the time. We sort of past the stage of saying, oh no, it can't be true. We sort of get very anxious about it and go, oh, we're done for. But even else, I'd even say Glasgow. It obviously has a lot of growing to do, but I think a lot of people in all the cities can probably find ways in which they're doing well, and that people are coming together to solve problems, whether it's off of their own initiative or of something of a bigger group. I think Southeast Asia has a lot of examples that are really impressive. Singapore, for example, in terms of built environment, is making leaps and strides and things like that. Obviously, that's just in one aspect. There's probably aspects that could be criticised as well. But yeah, like I said, pretty much every city that you go to, I think the people in those cities, regardless of the management of them, there's probably plenty of people putting in the effort to try and solve problems. So.
Good, thank you. I think what it demonstrates, there's so many different layers, isn't there? So many different elements. I mean, Julie's put in the toast, there's a lot being done in Orkney, so maybe we'll get, you know, you should pop over to Orkney while you're up there, Brandon, and we'll all try and get there when we can. But not by car or by plane. I don't know how we're going to do that. But it demonstrates, isn't it, there are pockets of good practice being done across the world in different layers. And I think what I've seen sort of from today's conversation is about the different layers that we need to consider when we rethink the environment, when we reimagine our cities, and also redesign communities. What is a community? It doesn't necessarily need to be the estate I live in. It could be a business community. It could be a students living in a block of flats. It can be anything, kind of a lot of businesses. So much things to consider, which shows how hard it is, you know, for our sort of leaders to sort of get their heads around it, as well as having that economy pressure that's placed on them constantly, which is obviously something that we need to consider. I'm going to try and wrap up now, I think, and then I'll hand over to Paula, who will advertise some other workshops that are going on. So that's one of the phrases I sort of thought about today when I was coming on here was about Boris's build back better, you know, build back burger, build back big, all the different things he talks about. But actually, what does that mean? Are we building better for what? You know, what isn't working? And he's not sort of telling us that. And I think what we've got from today is there is a lot of things that we can improve on, but again, building back better, we just need to understand on what and how. If we are to build the city of the future, we really need some real good, creative, imaginative thinking, and I think that the young people that have been here today have definitely demonstrated that for me, and I've taken a lot from this afternoon and will definitely take it away as a leader of a local authority. So I'm going to hand over to you, Paula, and just to say thank you to everyone who's participated on the panel. Big claps all around from me, and also for those who unfortunately I think must have had either had technology issues or have had to leave for other meetings, and for those who've stayed, thank you so much. So over to you, Paula.
Thank you, everybody. There was lots of food for thought there. I've got lots of things written down. The event today isn't just about the recorded event today, it's about taking away these messages, and there's quite a few key messages that we've got. As Denise said, this whole thing is in layers, and there's no doubt about it, there isn't a one size fits all, and it's quite complicated, but there is things that we absolutely can do. Education was something that's been mentioned again and again and again by every single one of us in different ways. That's educating ourselves, educating each other. Just think of it this way, we've all done lots of little things to create this huge problem. So what we can all do is do lots of little things to help us get out of it. And that is our layer of society that we can help, and we can help each other and help educate your next door neighbour, the people that you live with, the people that you work with or go to college with. And we need to change hearts and minds. We need to change our hearts with the stories of the reason why we need to do it for future generations, for people in parts of the world that are less fortunate than us and have arguably done less damage, but will see most of the consequences. And also minds, we need to have the facts at our disposal so we can understand what it actually truly means. But we also need to make sure that we use our voices to accelerate change at a higher level as well. We've got Denise here as head of a council. We all have councils and other things, and find out what your council's doing. There's some good suggestions about, you know, rationalising recycling, which would be a good practical solution. If a dozen people in every local authority went to their local authority leaders, it would and their councillors, it would soon happen. It doesn't take you know, anybody special to make change. Everybody can absolutely make change by using the voices in the right way. So I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody. There was lots of food for thought, and we will definitely shout about all of the messages and ideas that you've all had on the After the Pandemic and Engineering Together social media channels. And I encourage you all to keep up their messages and have people have the discussions wherever you are, and celebrate the things that you actually can do. We've had some thanks coming in on the chat, and yes, it has been very interesting, Julie, and thank you everyone. So I'm going to say thank you and goodbye to everybody.